You're listening to old Western stories, where dust settles slow, guns speak loud, and every tale rides straight into your imagination. Hit that subscribe and saddle up, the ride's just startin'. By the time the sun slid down behind the broken teeth of the canyon, Caleb Finch had already been blamed for 3 missing apples, a silver brooch, and $1.80 in loose coins that never once passed through his hands. And he knew the way folks' eyes followed him around Dry Willow was the same way they watched a stray dog near a henhouse, waiting for trouble, expecting it, certain it would come from him if it came at all. He moved through town with his shoulders slightly hunched, not from shame exactly, but from the habit of making himself smaller when grown folks' tempers started to rise, his boots scuffing the packed street dust, his sharp eyes catching everything without meaning to. Who came in on the stage, whose hands shook as they paid for flour, which horses carried more weight in their saddlebags than the riders wanted noticed. That sharpness, that hungry way he watched the world made folks uneasy. A boy who saw too much usually got blamed for more than he did. Outside the mercantile, Mr. Dobbs the merchant stood on his porch with his ledger pressed against his belly like a shield, mustache twitching as his gaze locked onto Caleb. "You," Dobbs snapped, jabbing a thick finger. "I was missin' jerky from that barrel after you passed through yesterday. Do not think I did not count." Caleb stopped, jaw tightening. "I did not take your jerky, Mr. Dobbs. You think I am blind?" Dobbs barked. "Sheriff ought to run you out for good. Orphan or not, a thief is a thief." A couple of bystanders nodded, not because they had seen anything, but because Dobbs spoke loud and it was easier to agree than think. Caleb's hand curled into a fist at his side. "You never see who does take things," he muttered before he could stop himself. "Only who is easiest to blame." Dobbs stepped off the porch, face reddening, but Deputy Cole stepped between them, one hand resting lazy on his belt. Cole was a heavy-set man with decent manners when he tried, but he never tried very hard with Caleb. "That is enough," Cole said, though his eyes rested on the boy with more warning than fairness. "Caleb, quit stirrin' trouble." "Go on. I was just walkin'," Caleb answered, but Cole's gaze had already slid past him, signaling the conversation was over. Across the street, a woman tugged her little girl closer by the arm as Caleb came near, the child's eyes wide with curiosity until her mother hissed, "Stay away from that boy. He is always in some scrape." Caleb felt the words land like small stones in a pile already too high. He let them stack on top of everything else and kept walking, heading out of town toward the canyon's edge, where the land fell away into a labyrinth of rock and shadow that held more honesty than most men he knew. Up there on the rim above Red Rock Canyon, the wind did not care who his daddy had been or what folks whispered. It just blew, carrying scents and sounds from miles around if a man, or a boy, was willing to listen. Caleb was. He climbed the narrow path he knew better than his own heartbeat, boots finding the same holds he had used since he was small, back when Ma was still alive and would call him home with a lantern held high. She had told him once that the canyon talked to those who respected it, that smoke and sound behaved different out here, and he had not forgotten. Near the rim, he paused, squinting toward the far side where the rock broke into steep shelves and crooked gullies. At first it seemed like every other evening, hawks wheeling slow, shadows deepening, the last smear of sunlight nursing the stone. Then he saw it, just a sliver at first, a thread of smoke where no campfire ought to be, thin and controlled, tucked up against a side hollow where it would not be seen from town but could send its signal far down the canyon. Caleb narrowed his eyes. There was movement too down in the folds, a flicker of metal where the sun caught it, the shifting outline of a horse where no riders had any reason to be, the bobbing glint of what might be a rifle barrel as someone moved between boulders. He lay flat on his stomach, easing forward until his chin rested on the rimrock and let his eyes adjust. Years of watching had taught him how to turn random shapes into patterns. What he saw made his chest go tight. 3 horses at least, maybe more, tethered in the shadow of a rock outcrop. Men moving with purpose, not like travelers resting after a long ride but like wolves checking a fence before the sheep sleep. One man pointed toward a narrow draw leading up toward the old north road that spilled right into Dry Willow's edge. Another knelt, drawing shapes in the dust. These were not ranch hands looking for strays. These were raiders planning their run. A small click sounded behind him. Caleb rolled onto his side, heart hammering, to find Jade Crow standing a few paces back, one boot planted solid, arms folded. Jade was old in the way strong trees got old, scarred, rooted, hard to move. Folks called him a scout, but really he was something older than that. A man who had spent more years under open sky than under a roof, face carved by weather, eyes sharp and pale as winter water. "You crawl around up here like a lizard, boy," Jade said, voice low and rough. "One day the rock is going to shed you." Caleb scrambled to his feet. "You should see this, Mr. Crow. There are men down there, not our men. Horses, too. Crawling around the canyon like they own it." Jade's gaze flicked toward the far side, but only for a heartbeat. "You see a lot," he said, not quite a compliment, not quite a rebuke. "That get you in trouble, come on. Sheriff sent me to count the clouds or some such fool thing." "I am not lying," Caleb snapped. Jade's eyes settled on him fully then, weighing the boy the way he weighed a new trail, careful, critical, no hurry to decide. "I did not say you were," Jade replied. "But seeing a thing right and explaining it to men who do not want to hear are 2 different skills. You are not much at the second." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, then shut it. Jade turned, starting back down the path. After a moment, Caleb followed, the unease in his chest growing heavier with each step. Back in town, the main street glowed in the last of the daylight, lanterns being lit one by one, dogs nosing at scraps, folks finishing up their day's trade. Sheriff Danvers stood outside his office, talking with Deputy Cole about something that made Cole chuckle. Jade Crow veered off toward the livery without another word. Caleb headed straight for the sheriff, dust still on his hands from the canyon rim. "Sheriff," he blurted, "there are men in Red Rock Canyon. Raiders, I think. Horses and rifles. They are watching the North Road." Danvers looked down at him, heavy brows drawing together, but not with concern so much as tired annoyance. "Caleb, not now," he said. "We are busy." "I am not macking it up," Caleb insisted. "They have a smoke where no one should. They—" Deputy Cole cut in with a snort. "There he goes again. Boy cannot go a day without some tale. You see every outlaw from here to Santa Fe if we let you talk long enough." A couple of men lounging nearby laughed. Caleb felt heat crawl up his neck. "I know what I saw," he said, louder now. "You do not even listen," Sheriff Danvers sighed. "What I hear is a boy with a reputation for trouble stirring up fear where we do not need it. Raiders in the canyon, this close, nonsense. If there were, Jade would have seen 'em." Caleb's eyes flicked toward the livery where Jade had gone. "He did see something," Caleb began, but the sheriff shook his head. "Enough. Go on home, Caleb, or wherever you roam at night. I have no time for it." The words hit harder than insult. No home, just wherever you roam. It reminded everyone within earshot that Caleb Finch belonged nowhere, not really. Laughter rippled again. Someone muttered, "He is just looking for attention." A woman nearby gathered her son close, whispering loud enough for Caleb to hear, "You stay away from him, you hear? His lies bring trouble." Caleb backed away, heart pounding, helpless anger burning behind his eyes. The sky darkened another notch, and he could not shake the picture of those horses in the canyon shadows, the careful way those men moved, like they had done this before. Raiders did not wait for permission from sheriffs to strike. They came when it suited them. He slipped away from the main street, cutting behind buildings until he stood near the old signal mound on the hill above town. It was a low rise, topped with a circle of stones and a stack of brush and kindling stacked nearby, always ready but never to be used except on the sheriff's command in the direst emergency. A signal fire meant danger, raiders, war parties, disaster, and it was forbidden to light it on one's own. A boy caught doing so could be whipped, jailed, even run out of town. Caleb knew that. Everyone did. That was why no one even looked at the hill on quiet evenings. No one except him. From here, he could see both the town and the dark mouth of the canyon in the distance, where that thin, secret smoke climbed like a crooked finger against the stars. He watched it, jaw clenched, while the sounds of Dry Willow drifted up faint and trusting. Piano music from the saloon, clink of dishes, low murmur of folks who believed the night ahead would be peaceful because it always had been before. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement again on the far ridge. Riders slipping into position, more than he had seen before, silhouettes against the starlight now clear as cutouts, rifles glinting as they checked their lines. This was no wandering band. This was a staging. They were coming, and soon. Caleb's breath shuddered. That was proof enough for any man with sense. But the men in town had already made up their minds about him. They would not come running because Caleb Finch said so. They would keep laughing until the first shot. His gaze dropped to the piled brush at his feet, then to the matchbox tucked in a niche under the stone ring, placed there for emergencies and forbidden to all but the sheriff or his order. Lighting a signal fire on his own was a crime. They would say he did it for mischief, for attention, for some wild lie. They might whip him bloody. They might toss him in a cell. They might cast him out for good. But if he did nothing, folks would die believing the world was safe just because it pleased them to think so. He swallowed hard, fingers trembling as he reached for the box, the weight of every accusation he had ever heard pressing against his chest. For once in his life he was not making trouble. The trouble was already on its way. He was the only one who saw it. Caleb Finch drew out a single match and held it between his fingers, the tiny stick of wood suddenly feeling heavy as a rifle, as a verdict, as the choice between being punished for a crime and living with the knowledge he had let a town fall in silence. The canyon waited in the distance, the raiders' shapes clear now against the dark. The town breathed beneath him, unaware. The boy stared at the unlit match in his hand and knew it was the only voice he had left. The match felt too small to hold all that weight, just a sliver of wood and promise between Caleb Finch's fingers, but in that huddled dark above Dry Willow it might as well have been a thunderbolt, and his hand shook in a way he hated, not from the chill slipping down off the canyon, but from the knowing that one scrape along the box would turn him from bothersome orphan into outlaw in the eyes of every soul down below. He stood there at the signal mound, stones at his boots, brush piled dry and waiting, and the night lay thick and close as if it had leaned in to hear which way he would break. He could feel the town at his back, its lanterns flickering soft, its laughter and clinking glasses and piano music drifting up lazy, full of trust they had not earned, while out beyond in the canyon the wrong kind of quiet held, the kind that listened. His jaw clenched. They would not listen to him. They never did. Every insult, every accusation seemed to crowd in around him now, as if the words had followed him up the hill. Thief, liar, trouble, boy with no home and no name worth saying. He heard Mr. Dobbs's voice, sharp and smug. Heard Deputy Cole's tired dismissal. Heard that woman dragging her little one aside like Caleb carried a plague. The match fluttered as his fingers trembled and he squeezed down until it dug into the groove of his thumb. "You light that and they will have a reason," he muttered to himself, voice low, barely more than breath. "They will not just look at you like trouble, they will have proof." He stared at the pile of brush. One spark and it would roar up, seen for miles. Signal of danger, signal of guilt, his. Far off, the canyon groaned softly, wind combing through its broken bones. Caleb turned his face toward it and narrowed his eyes. The raiders had been shadows before, half-seen shapes in the deepening dusk, but the night did not make them vanish. It sharpened them. On the ridgeline beyond Red Rock's mouth, he could see them now as black cutouts against a faint scattering of stars, riders shifting in their saddles, rifles laid across laps, a horse pawing impatient at stone. A faint clink of metal carried up, a saddle buckle, a bit ring, men talking low, planning, waiting. The thin, careful thread of hidden smoke still climbed from their hollow like a sly finger, but now he could see more. A lantern being hooded, its light smothered to a pinprick, a hand pointing down toward the north road, the slow turning of a horse's head. They were not resting. They were counting heartbeats. Caleb swallowed, throat dry. "They are real," he whispered, as if answering some taunting voice in his own skull. "They are real and they are common." For a moment he wondered if he could run back down, try one more time, grab Sheriff Danvers by the coat and drag him up here by force if he had to, but even as the thought flickered he knew it was foolish. The sheriff had turned his back full. Deputy Cole had laughed in his face. The town had already tried and convicted him without evidence on smaller matters. They would not put faith in his word on a thing this large. He let that truth settle bitter and cold. "You go down there now," he told himself. "They throw you in a cell for being a nuisance. Then those riders come, and the only one who saw it common will be locked behind bars." He could see it too clearly. Men scrambling half asleep, grabbing guns too late, horses screaming, folks scattering like kicked ants, and him shouting from iron, voice lost under gunfire. His other hand curled slowly into a fist. The unfairness of it burned hot, old and familiar. They had never trusted him, not when Ma died, not when his father's name slid away into silence, not when things went missing and needed a villain. He had been that boy in the corner everyone pointed to, and here he stood now, the only soul high enough, watchful enough to see the knife sliding toward them in the dark. Anger surged, fierce and bright. It was not just at them. It was at the whole world that had left him small and alone on this hill with a choice too big for his shoulders. "You owe them nothing," a mean, small voice whispered inside. "Let the raiders come. Let Dobbs count his coins then. Let the sheriff hear gunfire instead of your words for once." He breathed that thought in, held it. For a heartbeat it tasted sweet. Then another picture rose up behind his eyes, unbidden. The little girl whose hand had been yanked away from him in the street, eyes round not with scorn but with curiosity. Old Mrs. Harland, who sometimes left a heel of bread on the sill by accident when he passed. Rudd, the bartender who had once shoved a mug of watered-down coffee into his hands and grunted, "You look cold, boy." They had not stood up for him, but they had not all been cruel. And even the cruel ones did not deserve to die for being cowards. The match between his fingers suddenly felt like a question from the Almighty himself. "What kind of man are you going to be, Caleb Finch?" He had never been asked that by anyone. But the fire asked it now. Down in the canyon something shifted. The line of riders thickened. One shape split off, trotting along the upper edge to test the wind to see if their scent carried toward town. The horse's hooves scraped rock in a slow, steady rhythm that felt like a drumbeat counting down. Another man, lower in the shadows, slung his rifle off his shoulder and checked the loading with practiced efficiency. Farther back, two figures bent over a sack, parceling something out, bandanas maybe or extra cartridges. No laughter, no campfire talk. These were men tuned tight as bowstrings. Calder's chest tightened. There was nothing imagined here. No boy's tale, no trick of light. The danger crawled closer by the moment. He drew a breath, held the match up before his eyes, and listened to the scratchy rasp as he slid the little stick halfway along the side of the box without enough pressure to spark. The sound was small, but in that quiet it stretched out long. His hand paused. If he did it, there was no taking it back. Smoke would billow up, wide and wild, a column that said to every soul in Dry Willow, "Someone up on that hill believes we are in danger." And when they saw it was him, he could almost hear the curses already, the sheriff's angry stride, the sting of a belt or a switch if they called for lashes, jail, exile, maybe worse. He thought of nights curled up alone in the brush outside town, hat pulled over his eyes to keep off dew, stomach gnawing at his backbone, while laughter drifted from porches where families sat together. He had survived that once. He could do it again, but he had never survived watching innocent folks die because he kept quiet. His hands shook so hard the match rattled. Somewhere behind him, down in the cluster of buildings, a dog barked once, then again, uneasy. A horse snorted loud from the livery, hooves scraping, as if something in the air prickled at its hide. And in the shadows near those stalls, Jade Crow sat on an overturned crate, whittling by lamplight, aware in that half-drained, half-instinct way that the night had gone strange. He paused mid-stroke, blade resting in the curl of pine, listening. Another horse shifted. A lantern hissed. The wind ticked against the barn boards like fingers. Jade's eyes lifted toward the hill, though he could not see the signal mound from where he sat. A frown tugged at the corners of his mouth, and he muttered, "What are you up to, boy?" But he did not rise yet. Old habits kept him still, feeling the night, letting it talk its slow language of sound and scent. Up on the mound, that same wind pressed at Caleb's back, urging him forward or trying to shove him away. He could not tell. He stared at the brush piled inside the stone ring. Dry twigs, old sage, bits of scrap wood, all ready to burst at the first kiss of flame. It would climb quick, a straight tower of fire reaching into the sky, drawing every eye. "They will see it," he whispered. "They will come." No one had ever come when he just spoke. Maybe fire was a language they could not ignore. He looked again toward the canyon. The raiders were moving now, no longer still shapes. The line thickened as more horses slipped from the hollow where they had hidden, forming into a string that began edging toward the north road, low and slow. The leader lifted an arm and the line paused, held in check. Waiting for a moment, a sign, a breath of wind. Caleb saw the way they hugged the darker edges of rock, careful not to silhouette themselves too high. This was not their first raid. His pulse hammered in his ears. Each second he stood silent was a second they drew closer. He imagined their first shot snapping windows, cutting lamps, dropping men who never had a chance to cock a hammer. The match felt slick in his grip now. Sweat. Fear. He tightened his fingers and straightened his shoulders a little, the way he had seen grown men do before stepping into fistfights. "You are alone," he told himself, and for the first time the words sounded like something other than a wound. Alone meant no one could tell him what to do. Alone meant the choice was his, not the sheriff's, not Deputy Cole's, not Mr. Dobbs's with his ledger and suspicions. Caleb Finch, no one's son and lord of nothing, held a match in the fate of a town, and maybe there was something like rough, painful pride in that. Out in the dark, a metal bit jingled. A horse blew, restless. The thin line of secret smoke from the raiders' hollow thinned, then vanished as they smothered their little fire, ready to move. They were done waiting. So was he. He lifted the match to the box again, this time pressing just a breath harder, feeling the catch of rough phosphorus against the grain, the way the wood wanted to leap into flame at the slightest encouragement. The sound of the scratch seemed to roar in his ears, drowning out everything. The canyon, the town, the old insults. For an instant the head of the match glowed dull in his mind's eye, not quite lit yet, not quite dark, balanced on the edge like he was. Caleb stared at that tiny stick of wood, the whole night holding still around him, and knew in the next heartbeat he would either drop it back into the box and walk away or drag it hard enough to birth fire and change Dry Willow forever. The match flared with a hiss that sliced the night clean open. a tiny spear of light trembling at the end of Caleb Finch's shaking hand, and for one breath he stared at it like he had never seen fire before, like the world had shrunk to that one spark and the choice riding on it. Then the flame touched the dry brush and leapt high in an instant, hungry, fierce, racing up the piled sage and brittle wood with a roar that stole Caleb's breath. Heat slapped his face as the signal fire burst upward, taller than he expected, brighter than any torch he had ever held, a pillar of gold and orange clawing at the sky, and the hilltop glowed like dawn had arrived too early and too angry. Dry Willow saw it at once. A shout rose from town, sharp, angry, disbelieving, and lanterns swung wild as folks spilled from porches and doorways, necks craning up toward the forbidden mound. "Signal fire!" someone yelled. "Who lit that?" another voice snapped. "The boy, I see him." Then Sheriff Danvers charged from the office, Deputy Cole right behind him, their boots thundering up the slope, both men flushed red with fury, not fear. Caleb stumbled back as the two reached him, Danvers grabbing the boy by the shirt front and yanking him forward so hard Caleb's teeth clicked together. "What in blazes are you doing, boy?" the sheriff roared, breath hot with rage. "You out of your mind," Cole jabbed a finger at the burning mound. "That fire is for emergencies only. You light that without order, you're asking for a whip at best. Or a week in the lockup," Danvers growled. "Maybe more." The townsfolk gathered fast, Mr. Dobbs puffing up the hill, a couple ranch hands muttering, mothers dragging children close. Half of them shouted over the others, every accusation louder than the last. "He's doing it for attention. Always stirring trouble. I knew it'd be him." Danvers shook him again. "Put that matchbox down, boy." Caleb felt heat behind his eyes, breath tangled in his chest. "Sheriff, listen, there are raiders, saw them." "Not this again," Cole barked. "Boy, you will shut your mouth before I shut it for you." Laughter rippled, crueler in the fire's glow. Caleb twisted, trying to look past them toward Red Rock Canyon. "They're moving now. They weren't supposed to till later. My fire ruined their plan. They're coming early." Danvers slammed him back a step. "You lit that for no reason but mischief. There are no raiders." He never finished the sentence, because at that moment the canyon answered for Caleb. A distant crack split the air, sharp, deliberate, unmistakable. A rifle shot. The townsfolk froze, voices dying as fast as breath from a punched chest. Heads turned toward the canyon mouth. A second crack echoed, followed by the hollow boom of hooves striking stone. Danvers's grip loosened. Cole's eyes widened. Another shout carried through the dark, this one not from town but from the canyon itself. "Ride!" someone bellowed in the distance. "Ride!" Caleb tore free of the sheriff's hand, stumbling forward. "There, look there!" And for the first time they did. Dark shapes poured from the canyon mouth, riders kicking up a long trail of dust that glowed ghost-white in the silver of the rising moon, rifles glinting as they raised them high. Raiders. Real. Fast. Too fast. The signal fire had rattled them, forced them into motion early, but not early enough to stop the charge already rolling toward Dry Willow like a breaking storm. The crowd gasped in one voice, a single long inhale of fear. Cole backed up a step. "Lord above," Dobbs stammered, but that boy," Sheriff Danvers swallowed hard, eyes wide as he whispered, "he was telling the truth." Another crack of gunfire split the night. A bullet hissed through the brush 10 feet from the signal mound. Folks screamed. The raiders were still far, but not far enough, and no one moved. No one knew what to do, except Jade Crow. The old scout appeared at the base of the mound like he had risen from the dirt itself, boots pounding the slope, knife still in one hand from whittling, eyes shining sharp with the kind of knowing that had lived in him longer than most men in town had been alive. "Danvers," Jade barked, voice snapping like a whip, "get your head on straight." He shoved past the stunned sheriff, grabbed Caleb by the back of the collar and hauled him upright. "Boy, get down." Raiders common in hot. Jade spun toward the crowd, voice booming, "Arm yourselves. Now move," Sheriff Danvers stammered, face still pale. "Crow, crow," he lit the "blast the fire," Jade snapped. "You see what's common out of that canyon?" He jabbed a finger toward the charging silhouettes. "That boy just saved your skins." The words hit like a blow. Cole blinked. Dobbs swallowed his pride. Mothers clutched children. And suddenly the town broke apart into frantic motion, men racing for rifles, women sprinting for shelter, lanterns swinging wild as shouts filled the air. Jade Crow pushed Caleb behind a thick granite outcrop near the mound. "Stay low," he growled. "You're with me now." Caleb's chest thundered. "They didn't believe me." "Folks don't see danger till it's chewing on 'em," Jade answered. "You got sharp eyes. That's your curse and your gift. Now use it." Down below, riders spread into a fan shape, advancing with deadly purpose. Another shot fired closer now. A bullet smacked rock near Jade's boot, spraying chips. Jade didn't flinch. Instead, he stood tall just long enough to shout downhill, "Positions. Get to cover. Flank left side of the smithy, do it now." His voice cut through panic the way a hawk cuts through wind, clean and certain. Men obeyed. Danvers grabbed a rifle from a startled ranch hand. Cole scrambled to load his shotgun with shaking hands. And Caleb crouched behind the granite, his heart pounding so loud he wondered if the raiders could hear it. Jade knelt beside him, eyes on the ridge. "You knew ours before any of them," he said quietly. "That takes grit." Caleb shook his head. "All it did was get me yelled at. And now it's getting you in the fight," Jade said, loading a lever action with swift, practiced motions. "You see something shift in that canyon, you call it, loud. You trust me," Caleb whispered. Jade didn't look at him. "Boy, I do not trust much, but I trust what I can see with my own eyes. And what I saw was you warning a town too stubborn to listen." Caleb's throat tightened. Before he could answer, Jade jerked his chin toward the canyon. "Eyes up. They're moving again." The raiders surged into a faster trot. Dust rolled behind them. Rifles lifted like a row of dark branches. And the first rider broke ahead of the others, leaning low, horse driving hard toward Dry Willow's north wall. Sheriff Danvers shouted, "Incoming." Cole raised his shotgun and fired too early, the blast booming wide and useless. "Hold your fire," Jade thundered. "Wait till you see 'em proper." Caleb saw it first. A second line of raiders angled left, slipping toward the sawmill road, hoping to flank the town's weak side. "Jade," Caleb gasped. "Left side, sawmill bend." Jade's eyes flicked there, caught the motion, and he yelled to Danvers, "Send 2 men left. Now." Then he looked at Caleb with something close to respect. "Keep calling 'em like that." Caleb nodded, breath fast. Another crack split the air closer. A bullet tore through the brush inches above his head. Jade shoved him down. "Stay behind the rock. You get hit, I will tell the town they deserve to lose you." Caleb almost laughed, just a breath, strained and sharp. Then the world tilted forward as the first raiders fired in earnest, muzzle flashes strobing the canyon edge, lead humming through the air like angry bees. Horses screamed. Men shouted. The town of Dry Willow finally understood the truth Caleb had carried alone, and the signal fire roared above them, bright as judgment, casting long shadows that danced over the hill where Caleb crouched beside Jade Crow, no longer just a boy blamed for every wrong, but the only one who had stood watch soon enough to see the danger coming. Jade leaned close, voice steady even with gunfire cracking around them. "This is where you stand, boy. This is where you prove what you are." Caleb swallowed hard and nodded. More riders poured from the canyon mouth, their formation breaking into 2 sweeping arcs. Jade raised his rifle. "They're pushing early," he growled. "Your fire rattled them." "Good." Caleb stared at the inferno he had lit, the tower of flame splitting the night. "I didn't think it'd be this big." "Things worth doing usually are," Jade answered. Then he squared his shoulders, eyes sharp as cut stone, and Caleb knew the moment had come. The raiders thundered down, the town scrambled, guns lifted, dust rising, danger rushing in like a flood. And the boy who had been blamed for everything watched the consequences of his choice unfold in fire and steel. Jade gripped his shoulder. "Stay with me." Caleb nodded once tight, determined. The raiders let out a unified roar. Jade chambered around. Caleb braced. The first wave hit the edge of town, shouting, firing, charging. And on the burning hill where it all began, the boy who lit the signal fire steeled himself for the battle he had forced into the open. Gunfire rolled over Dry Willow like a summer storm that had forgotten how to bring rain, only lead and noise and fear instead. And Caleb Finch felt every shot rattle up through the stone under his boots as the raiders' first charge slammed into the north edge of town, horses screaming, dust rising in heavy curtains that flashed orange under the signal fire's glow. Down below, men dove behind water troughs and wagons, boots skidding in the dirt as splinters flew from hitch posts and porch rails. The streets that had held lazy talk and piano tunes an hour ago now churned with shouting and the hard crack of rifles. Jade Crow worked the lever of his rifle with a calm rhythm that cut clean through the chaos. The old scout kneeling behind the granite outcrop at the signal mound's shoulder, smoke from the beacon curling around his hat brim as he fired, shifted, and fired again, not wasting a single shot. Caleb crouched beside him, breathing hard, eyes wide and stinging from the mix of dust and heat, trying to take in everything at once. The way the raiders rode low to make themselves smaller targets, the spurts of dust where bullets hit short, the flares of muzzle fire in the dark like brief, cruel stars. "Count that gap between the smithy and the well trough," Jade said, voice steady, as though they were talking over coffee instead of gunfire. "That's where they will try to slip men through." "You see movement there, you shout." Caleb nodded, throat too tight to answer at first, then forced out, "I see it." And he did. Even with his heart thudding like a hammer, his eyes stayed sharp. He saw 3 raiders peel off from the main charge and angle left, using the shadow of a leaning wagon to cover their approach, one of them raising something that caught the light, a pistol, maybe, or a short carbine. "Left flank," Caleb yelled, pointing. "Near the wagon." Jade did not question. "Danvers," he roared, voice cutting through the din. "Left side by the wagon." Sheriff Danvers, hunkered behind a water trough with his hat knocked crooked, jerked his head that way, saw the shadows moving and swung his rifle. He fired, the recoil jolting his shoulder, and though Caleb could not tell if the shot struck home, it forced the raider to dive for cover, breaking the smoothness of their advance. Deputy Cole, pale and sweating, popped up beside Danvers long enough to send a blast of buckshot in the same direction before ducking again, cursing under his breath. "Good eye, boy," Jade muttered, levering another round. "Keep talking to me." Raiders tore into the outer buildings now. A horse crashed through a hitch rail near the livery and went down hard, screaming, as its rider rolled free and kept running, gun drawn. Bullets punched into the front of the mercantile, glass shattering in a bright spray that caught the firelight and rained down like jagged stars. Men shouted from windows, firing from second-story rooms. Women dragged children toward the church, skirts hiked, faces tight and pale, a couple of them glancing up at the signal mound where Caleb's fire roared. No one called him liar now. No one called him anything at all. They were too busy staying alive. Jade's rifle cracked again. A raider's hat flew from his head and spun away, the man dropping low, scrambling for cover behind a rain barrel. Caleb saw another rider trying to swing wide around the smithy, aiming to cut behind the scatter of buildings toward the back alley. "Jade, one behind the smithy," Caleb shouted. On the far side, Jade's eyes flicked there and he hissed, "Too far for my line. Danvers." But he did not have to shout this time. Sheriff Danvers had already seen the movement, and with a look of raw regret carved into his features like something permanent, he left his safe spot, lunged across open ground to a burnt-out wagon, and fired from there, drawing the raider's aim to himself so others could reposition. "Fool man is trying to make up for not listening to you," Jade muttered. "Maybe he will and maybe he will not. That is his road." Caleb watched Danvers reload with shaking hands and then grit his teeth, staying in the line of fire anyway. Another bullet slammed into the wagon near his head. He flinched but did not run. For all his earlier stubbornness, the sheriff stood up when it counted. Below, Deputy Cole shouted, back from the windows. "Keep low." His voice cracked, but he was shouting orders instead of excuses now. He grabbed a young ranch hand by the collar and yanked him away from the street just as a bullet snapped through the space where the boy's head had been. "Stay behind the barrels," Cole barked. "Do not stand up unless you mean it." Caleb felt something strange twist in his chest at the sight of them all moving, shifting, acting because of warnings he had given. Twice already, men had turned their heads at his shout, changed their positions, and stayed alive because of it. No one yelled at him to be quiet. No one shoved him aside or told him to go home. They were listening. "More common from the bend," Jade said, and Caleb strained his gaze toward the canyon mouth, where another string of riders appeared. Back up. A second wave they must have kept hidden in the deeper folds. The signal fire had dragged them forward early, but it had not thinned their numbers enough. "How many?" Jade asked. Caleb counted fast in his head, using the trick he had learned watching cattle lines. 6, no, 8, 2 hanging back. "Those last 2 will be trouble," Jade said. "They are waiting for something." "What?" Caleb asked. "You tell me," Jade replied. "Your eyes see farther than mine these days." Caleb focused. The 2 riders in the rear moved slower, more deliberate, and as they drew closer he could see each had something long and wrapped strapped across his saddle, too narrow for rifles, too stiff for blankets. Metal ends flashed when the fire caught them. "They got something, poles, maybe." "No," his breath caught. One of the men reached down, fingers brushing the bundle, and Caleb saw the shape clearer, glass or clay at the end, cloth tied around it. His stomach dropped. "Torches," he whispered. "They brought torches." Jade's jaw tightened. "Course they did. A town like this, you cannot take it quick, you burn it uncomfortable." He spat into the dust, then slapped a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You did not bring them. Do not carry what belongs to wolves." Down below, the raiders' leader shouted something and gestured. The first wave, frustrated by the town's hastily firmed-up line, men at windows, behind barrels, flanking from alleys, slowed and started to circle, looking for a softer spot. The second wave began to fan out, those 2 riders with torches hanging back, waiting for the right moment to light their ruin. Gunfire thinned for a heartbeat, space opening between shots as both sides caught breath and checked guns. In that gap, the sounds of the town came clearer. A woman sobbing inside a shuttered house, a baby crying, horses blowing hard, the tick of cooling metal, someone praying under their breath. Caleb's hands trembled so bad he could hear the rattling of cartridges in his pocket. Jade noticed. "Breathe," he said. "You can be scared later. Right now you be useful." Caleb nodded, dragged in air that tasted like smoke and fear and sage. His gaze snagged on a raider creeping along the side of the feed store, trying to get an angle on the church door. Without thinking, Caleb snatched up the rifle Jade had propped nearby, thumbed the hammer back the way he had seen men do his whole life, and braced the stock against his shoulder, just like Jade had once showed him with an unloaded gun behind the livery. "Easy," Jade said, but he did not take the rifle away. "Do not rush it. You are not flinging stones now. Breathe, check your line, then squeeze." Caleb's eye found the notch, sighted along the barrel, heart pounding so loud he thought it might shake his aim. The raider leaned out a little more, rifle lifting toward the church door. Caleb exhaled, squeezed. The rifle kicked back, slamming his shoulder, louder than he expected. For a second he saw nothing but smoke and the white shock of recoil. Then the world slid back into place. The raider had stumbled, hand flying to his arm where Caleb's shot had hit, hard enough to jar the gun from his grip. The man dropped behind the water barrel, clutching his shoulder, no longer a threat to the church door. Caleb stared, throat closing. You stopped him, Jade said firmly. That is what you did. That is all you aimed for. Caleb swallowed hard. He had not killed the man, but the knowledge that his hands had sent that bullet out still rocked him. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a boy whose world had suddenly grown heavier. Yet no one shouted at him. No one told him to get back. Down below, someone yelled, "Good shot from the hill." And another voice called, "Keep calling him Caleb." Hearing his name like that, not as a curse but as part of the line, made something warm and painful rise in his chest, like a knot finally loosening. For the first time in his memory, he was not outside the town looking in. He was part of its defense, part of its hope, part of its story. Sheriff Danvers, face streaked with dirt and sweat, glanced up toward the signal mound between shots, and Caleb saw it, the brief flash of shame in the man's eyes, then a nod. Just a small one, but it was more apology than any speech. Deputy Cole, still shaking, reloaded and barked at a couple of younger men. "Listen to the boy on the hill. He sees what we do not." The battle turned just a little. Raiders who had expected sleepy streets found a town awake and dug in. Lines of fire covering alleys they thought empty, windows turning into sharp eyes. 2 of the raiders' horses went down under concentrated volleys, riders scrambling away only to be driven back by more shots. The line at the north edge held, not pretty, not neat, but it held. And that was enough to make the raiders restless. Their leader hauled his horse up short, wheeling it in a tight circle, shouting angry orders Caleb could not catch. The second wave began to pull back a few yards, regrouping. Men leaned in close, heads together. The 2 torch carriers shifted their hands on those wrapped bundles, glancing toward a new target, the livery, where the roof was dry as tinder and the wind would gladly carry sparks across half of Dry Willow if given the chance. Jade followed Caleb's gaze. "Livery," he muttered. "They set that alight, we lose half our horses and all our nerve." "You were right," Caleb said hoarsely. "They are planning to burn us out." "They always were," Jade answered. "But fire cuts both ways. Yours woke this town up. Theirs will try to put it back to sleep." He winced suddenly, hand flying to his side as a bullet chipped rock nearby and sent stone into his ribs like a thrown fistful of gravel. He sucked a harsh breath, teeth gritted. "You hit," Caleb gasped. Jade pressed his palm against his shirt, fingers coming away smeared with a line of red. "It is a scratch," he growled, voice rougher now. "I had worse from barbed wire. Do not go soft on me." But he shifted his weight more carefully after that, the tightness in his jaw betraying pain he would not name. Caleb's stomach flipped. The thought of Jade going down, of facing the next wave without that steady presence at his side, turned the night colder than the mountain wind. Below, Sheriff Danvers shouted, "They're pulling back." A ragged cheer rose, but Jade shook his head. "Do not you cheer yet," he muttered. "That is not retreat, that is thinking." And he was right. The raiders did not vanish back into the canyon. They circled wide instead, hooves throwing up long streaks of dust, forming into a broad arc that began to swing toward the livery side, where cover was thinner and the wind from the canyon nudged straight through town, carrying the signal fire sparks further than they should go. The 2 torch carriers moved to the front of that curve now, unwrapping their bundles to reveal the ugly truth, bottles sloshing with liquor or oil, cloth stuffed in the neck, torches ready to turn them into flying fire. One rider in the middle, taller than the rest, raised his arm high, hand clenched around something that flashed. Maybe just a knife, maybe a badge taken from some other ruined town, and the men around him tensed, waiting for his signal. The air on the hill went tight, humming with possibility. Jade hissed through his teeth, bracing his rifle again despite the stiffness in his side. "They are fixin' to make this the last pass," he said. "We stop that fire or we watch Dry Willow cook." Caleb squinted, heart hammering, as he caught another detail no one else seemed to see. A smaller group of 3 riders breaking off even farther right, sliding behind a low rise that would hide them from the main street but bring them out near the back alley behind the church and mercantile, soft underbelly of the town. They carried no torches, they carried rope. "Jade," he whispered, voice suddenly dry, "there is a second group, slippin' behind that rise. They will hit the back side when the others charge." Jade turned his head, followed the line of Caleb's pointed finger and nodded once, eyes gone hard. "You are seeing the whole board now, boy." A fresh knot of fear settled under Caleb's ribs, but it was a different kind than before. Not the helpless kind. The kind that came when you knew what was coming and knew that what you did next mattered. Down below, Sheriff Danvers looked from the circling riders to the livery, understanding dawning in his strained face. Deputy Cole licked his lips, tightened his grip on his shotgun. Men shifted behind their cover, exhausted but readying themselves again. The signal fire roared behind Caleb, throwing heat at his back like a giant hand, while out in the dark, the raiders' leader finally dropped his raised arm. The torch carriers spurred forward, rags flaring to life as they struck them against their saddle steel. The hidden flankers disappeared behind the rise, ready to strike from the blind side. And on the signal mound, Jade Crow and Caleb Finch stared down the coming wave that would decide if Dry Willow burned or stood. The raiders came on like a hard wind rolling down a narrow pass, 3 prongs cutting toward Dry Willow in one hungry sweep, torchmen at the front of the curve with their bottles aflame, flankers slipping behind that low rise like shadows learning how to crawl, and the main wave pressing straight at the town's north line with rifles raised and teeth bared. The signal fire behind Caleb Finch threw long, wild light across the hill, heat at his back like a hand trying to push him forward, and down below the town braced itself in the split second before everything hit at once, men shouting to one another, boots thudding as folks darted to new cover, the whole place holding its breath like a horse before a jump. Jade Crow tightened his jaw, pain riding up from his wounded side with every breath, but he planted his boots and leveled his rifle again, steady as a fence post in a windstorm, and Caleb crouched beside him, eyes scanning the dark the way he always had, hungry for movement, for patterns, for the tiny piece of truth other folks missed. Jade's voice came low and grim. "Watch their hands, boy, not their horses. Hands tell you stories horses hide." And Caleb nodded, breath shallow, fingers trembling as he rechecked the cartridges in his pocket. For he knew this next charge was everything. This was the one that decided whether Dry Willow would have a dawn at all. The first torchman lit his bottle with a flare of orange, flame licking up the cloth, and spurred hard toward the livery, the wind pushing the fire back into a long tail. Caleb shouted, "Torch on the right," and Sheriff Danvers spun that way in time to fire, hitting the rider's knee, sending both man and horse sliding sideways in a plume of dust, the torch rolling harmlessly into the street, sputtering but dying before it found anything to burn. But the second torchman was faster, smarter, leaning low with his bottle swinging wide, flame sputtering in the wind, and he hurled it hard toward the livery roof. It arced through the dark like a burning tear and smashed against the shingles with a sound Caleb felt more than heard, a heavy thump followed by the whoosh of dry wood catching. Flames crawled up the edge of the roof, eager, greedy, climbing toward the rafters. Someone down below yelled, "The livery's lit," and panic swelled in the air, because if that building went up, half the horses that kept this town alive would die with it, and the fire would carry across the street like a living beast. Jade grunted, bracing a hand against his wounded side, breath hissing through his teeth. "That's trouble," he muttered. "Real trouble." Caleb scanned the building fast, eyes darting, mind racing. The wind was blowing east, not north, which meant the fire would run down the roof line, away from the hay loft at least for the moment. "It ain't at the loft yet," Caleb said quickly. "It's catchin', but it's crawlin' slow, wind's pushin' it sideways." Jade gave a short nod. "Good, keep an eye on it. They'll try again." And they were. One of the flankers, the ones Caleb had spotted earlier, slipped out from behind the rise and angled straight toward the church alley, rope coiled in his hand, meaning to slip into town while the main wave drew all eyes forward. Caleb saw him just as the rider dipped into deeper shadow. "Jade, flanker, by the church well, he's movin' in now." "Call it louder," Jade barked. "They can't hear your heart from here." Caleb swallowed and shouted, "By the church well." Behind the rise. One slippin' in. Sheriff Danvers whipped his head around, spotted the shadow, and fired, the bullet sparking off the stone well and forcing the flanker to break wide, ruining his angle. Deputy Cole, shaking but determined, fired a second shot that bit into the dirt near the raider's horse, sending the man scrambling back toward his group. "Good call, boy," Cole yelled, voice raw. That praise hit Caleb like a warm shock, unsteadying, strange, welcome. He barely had time to breathe before the main wave crashed down harder, raiders thundering toward the troughs and wagons where townsfolk held the line. Muzzle flashes stuttered through the dark, bullets whining off iron and wood, horses dancing sideways in the dust. Jade fired, levered, fired again, his movements sharp but tight with pain, his hat tipped low to keep sweat out of his eyes. Caleb spotted another movement near the smithy and called it out, and Danvers hit that one too, forcing the rider to peel off with a curse. But Jade's injury was catching up. He gasped once, knees dipping for the first time, and Caleb grabbed his arm. "Jade, I ain't fallen," Jade rasped, pushing off the rock with stubborn fury. "Don't you dare see me fall, but you keep watchin'. Your eyes are holdin' this place together." Caleb's heart kicked hard. He turned back toward the raiders just as the leader rose in his saddle, shouting something guttural and sharp, lifting his arm high again. 2 riders peeled left, another 3 right, and Caleb saw it before anyone else, the pattern. It wasn't random. It wasn't rage. It was a feint. "Jade," Caleb shouted. "They're not hittin' the livery next. They're drowin' fire left so the ones on the right can throw again." Jade blinked hard, then nodded. "Call it out." Caleb stood half into the open, ignoring the sting of dust in his eyes. "They're feinting left," he yelled. "2 more are going for the livery roof. Stop the right side." Danvers snapped his head toward Caleb, saw the truth in the boy's eyes, and bellowed, "Right side." "Watch the right," Cole took up the cry. 2 ranch hands shifted positions behind the water troughs, rifles ready. And when the torchmen on the right swung their bottles forward, 3 shots rang out from town, slamming one rider sideways and hitting the bottle in the other's hand, exploding it in a burst of flaming liquid that scattered harmlessly across the dirt. The second wave faltered. Horses screamed, pulling back. The leader cursed loud, shaking his reins in frustration. Jade exhaled shakily. "You just saved this whole stretch of town," he murmured. "Don't forget that." But there was still the fire already burning. Flames licked up the livery roofline, eating shingles fast. Caleb stared at it, chest tight. "Jade, if that roof goes—" "I know," Jade growled. "Danvers, Cole. Get water crews on that roof." Danvers nodded sharply. "You heard him. Buckets, ladders." Men sprinted across the dusty yard, forming a ragged bucket line from the well to the livery wall. Deputy Cole hauled a ladder upright, bracing it with his shoulder as 2 ranch hands scrambled up, splashing water at the crawling flames. The roof hissed and spat, embers flying like angry insects, but the fire slowed, beaten back a foot at a time. The raiders saw it. They didn't like what they saw. Their leader barked a final order, and the remaining riders pulled back in a scattered arc, hooves throwing up pale dust as they swung away from the town's edge. Caleb watched them regroup at the canyon mouth. dozens of dark shapes forming an uneven line. Then the leader raised his hand once more, not in charge this time, but retreat. The raiders wheeled, horses kicking off hard, and thundered back into the canyon, their shouts echoing against stone until they faded into the maze of dark cliffs and winding shadows. Dry Willow waited, rifles trained on the dust, breaths held until the night settled again and only the crackle of the livery roof remained. Jade leaned heavily on his rifle, breath ragged. "That's it," he muttered. "They ain't mackin', a third pass." Not tonight. Caleb realized he was shaking. Hard. He still held the rifle Jade had given him, knuckles white, smoke stinging his throat. Jade eased himself down to sit against the stone, groaning softly as the wound tugged. "Sit, boy," he murmured. "Your legs'll quit on you anyway." Caleb sank down beside him, chest heaving, eyes stinging. For a long moment neither spoke. The battle's noise faded under the quiet hiss of dying flames and the distant whimpers of frightened horses. Then footsteps scuffed up the slope. Sheriff Danvers approached, hat in hand, face streaked with soot and shame. He stopped in front of Caleb, swallowed, and said in a voice low enough that only the hilltop heard it, "I misjudged you, son. Badly." I'm sorry." Caleb blinked hard. Danvers nodded once awkward, then stepped back. Deputy Cole followed, dirt blackened and panting, giving Caleb a small nod, firm and respectful. No mockery, no disbelief, just acknowledgement. A woman who earlier had pulled her girl away from Caleb climbed the last stretch of the hill, daughter in tow, and laid a tired hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for warning us." The girl peeked from behind her skirt, eyes wide, not with fear this time but with something like awe. Caleb hadn't any words, he just nodded. Jade grunted softly. "Told you," he said, voice rough as gravel but warmer than the fire behind them. Sharp eyes. Right heart, that's a dangerous mix. And a needed one. Caleb looked out over Dry Willow. The livery roof still smoldered, but the fire crews were climbing down now, the worst of it beat cold. Lanterns swung. Folks hugged each other in the street, horses settled. The town breathed again. His town. He understood that now. When he looked back toward the canyon, only darkness waited there, holding the promise of trouble someday returning. Raiders had long memories. The leader's shadow would be seen again. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to the boy on the hill. Caleb let out a slow breath, the kind that made room in a man's chest for something new. The signal fire behind him crackled lower, no longer roaring, just glowing embers giving back the last of their heat. Jade touched his shoulder once, steady. "You lit the fire that saved 'em," he said. "They'll remember that longer than any lie ever hung on you." Caleb watched the rooftops glimmer under the settling dusk, the line between boyhood and something steadier drawn quiet beneath his boots, and as dawn just barely brushed the edge of the horizon, he knew the truth of the night would outlast the flames. And Dry Willow would stand because he did. You've been riding with old Western stories. If the tale hit your mark, give it a like, drop a comment about your favorite part, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next trail we ride. Don't forget, hit that subscribe so you're always in the saddle, and you'll always be ready when the next story rides in.